Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Santa Paula Baptist Church. Um, I've been coming since such a young age. My mom has a photo of, I think they brought me over here when I was like the first week I was born, and when they did, I had already had like hair that was past my ears, so they had to cut my hair before coming into the church. So I think that's kind of funny. But a name that I'll remember for the rest of my life is Pastor Boyle. So if you remember or got to meet him, go ahead and raise your hand real quick. And so he used to be the senior pastor before Pastor Mike, and he lived his life. He was in World War II. He had survived that despite seeing what happened to his friends, and then he would pray, Lord God, please, if I make it out of this alive, if I can go home, I'm going to serve you with the rest of my life. And he would go on to raise money, raise funds, save the college that Kale and Jerry went off to, which is Hillsdale over in Oklahoma. Or I'm sorry, Arizona. Oklahoma, sorry. And he would go on to start other churches all over the U.S., and I think it was like 100+ churches that he raised money for. And it's really amazing. And with a testimony like that, sometimes it's kind of baffling to hear the way he would start sermons. And the way he would start those sermons is saying, especially if there were new people here, is, good morning, thank you for joining the rest of us hypocrites. And so it might seem baffling to hear that come from Pastor Boyle, but in where I stand now and how I try to preach my faith, it's very relatable to myself. I sometimes get stricken with a little bit of guilt, and it's a good thing to feel that, because it means that I can have a little bit of correction. Every Wednesday night, Kale will ask us without fail, hey, did you talk to someone this week? Did you share your testimony? Did you invite them to church? Did you let them know that Jesus loves them? And without fail, he'll do this, and I'll take a mental inventory in my head and say to myself, like, hey, did I do those things? Did I talk to someone this week? For the rest of the 6 days that I wasn't in church, did I speak to someone about my testimony? When I have to ride to Santa Ana over and over again, and I'm trapped in this vehicle with another person for 6 hours, that opportunity to speak about Christ. And sometimes the answer is no. That even though I stand up here and I preach to you, I still have my failures, and I still fall under a category where I love God and I want to preach about God, but we'll miss out on those opportunities, and we'll still fall under a category of being a hypocrite. And thinking about Pastor Boyle, we think of it as history, and we think, like, but he's a great man. I'm sure when he speaks out and he says this opening line, that he has the same grief in his own heart, which is, I could have spoke more. I could have preached to more people. I could have talked more about Christ's love in my own heart. With that in mind, today, I just want to keep that thought in our pockets for later. I want to go into some current events of today. In October 7th, we had the attack from the Gaza Strip into Israel, where they would launch something like 2,000 plus rockets, almost in concession with each other, into the country, and taking the lives of many civilians and maiming and harming hundreds more also. And with that, we think to ourselves, this is the start of something big. This is the start of a new war. But in reality, that date, October 7th, is just another date in a string of violence in the history of Israel. I would like to take a moment to go back in history a little bit. I know it's maybe Seems redundant to go all the way back to the beginning, but it gives us an idea of what is happening, the history of the people, the prophecies that are going on, and what that means for us today, looking at Israel and seeing that that land and its people is almost like the clock in the back of the room where the time is ticking, but we don't understand the numbers on it. Like, we don't understand how much time there is left. So as we get into that, I just want to get into quick summaries. If you've been in Sunday school, for any duration of time, these things might start to click in your mind. But if that's not something you're familiar with, don't be disheartened. Like, that's what this is for. And also, that's what Wednesday night and that's what Sunday morning is for, right? If after today you realize, hey, I want to learn more, I want to know more, I want to engrave more into my heart. Don't skip out on Wednesday night and Sunday morning, and obviously for the services like we're doing right now. So what we have, if you remember that song, Father Abraham, he had many sons. We go all the way back to the beginning of Abraham, and he was just a pagan, just like everyone else in the land that he came from. And one day God would speak to him and say, hey, from your seed will be a great nation that will serve me. And in his mind, he thinks oh, Lord, I'm old. My wife is old. She is barren. We have no kids. And in that and his travels, he would eventually gain a son, and through his faith would bring him up to a mountain where God would spare his son from the sacrifice that we would know as the foreshadowing of what Christ would do for us later. That son would be named Isaac. Isaac, and through his lifetime, would eventually have two sons of his own, Ishmael. It was Jacob and Esau. So Jacob being the cheater and Esau being the hairy kid that would hunt, and he was the manly man of the two. And Jacob would eventually take that blessing from his brother, his rightful blessing because he was born first, and eventually would go out to the wilderness, and then he would fight with God or wrestle with God. And his name would be changed from Jacob the cheater to the one who fought and prevailed with God, which is Israel, which is where we get the name from today. And he would bear 12 sons, and one of them would be Joseph. And Joseph would be his favorite son, with a coat of many colors, and his brothers in their jealousy would sell that son into slavery to Egypt. His lifetime would be a lifetime of what I would say is quite a bit of suffering. My brothers hate me, they sold me, I'm in this country, I'm doing my best as a slave. I get accused of sexually assaulting Potiphar's wife, get sent to jail, and eventually through all that he would keep his faith, and he wouldn't grumble once through his lifetime, or at least it's not recorded, and eventually would be blessed and be put in the position where he was second to Pharaoh, or the one in power, and eventually get to see his brothers again and offer forgiveness for the thing that they had done to him. Then you have the Hebrew people who are now, instead of being in Hebron, which is, I believe, where we get the name Hebrews from, is where they originally were, and they would move to Egypt, where they would start as all those brothers and then eventually explode. And going from second in command of Egypt, Joseph's lineage would then turn into the millions, and the Egyptians would say, hey, where'd these guys come from? We're going to make great labor out of these Hebrons, or out of these Israelites. We would have Moses come into the picture. Moses would eventually offer them the exodus out of the country after the people are suffering under the rule of the Pharaoh. They would cross the Red Sea and wander the desert for 40 years. Joshua and Caleb would then come into power. They were one of the original 12 spies that said, hey, we can take that land. Like who cares how many giants are? Our God is bigger than those giants. We can take it. And after the rest of the 10 spies say, no, go, we look like grasshoppers. We can't do this. They would spend all that time wandering in the desert. That old generation would fade away, and the new generation being led by Joshua and Caleb, would go in there and they would take over. And they would even, Caleb would even get the title of giant killer from all of the slaughters over there. It's like, and there where they would start taking back this land. And I want to go to our first verse, so if you'll turn with me over to Genesis, and that's chapter 15, verse 18. It's a little short verse there. We're going to be talking about how much land it is that was promised to the Israelites all the way back from Abraham's day. And this is what God says to him. In that day, Jehovah made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thee seed, I have given this land, from the river of Egypt into the great river of the Euphrates. And so I have a little bit of a map here. Egypt is way over here, and we have this river, and then the Euphrates, I believe, is like up here on this map, and they run parallel to each other. So the land that's promised to them, to the Israelites, is even bigger than what this map is onto here. But this is the little strip that's currently what we call Jerusalem today. And so you have this huge section God has already promised them. And right now, as they start to take over in that land, they would eventually start turning hands. So from Joshua and Caleb, we go into Judges. The judges are the ones that would not only lead the people at the time, but they would also free the people from the captivity, from slaughters, and being dispersed through the land. And they would repeat this pattern over and over again. Thank you. As they would go forth and repeat this pattern of turning their face away from God, being punished by being enslaved or being slaughtered by the people that would come over and capture them, they would be freed by these judges, and this would keep repeating. And so we have King Saul, excuse me, who would, what did you say, Liz? Why did they pick him? What did you say? Do you remember that Bible study? He was a hottie. There we go. And so he was taller than the rest. He was good looking. And so they would choose him to be the leader. And eventually, after his own failures, we would have King David. And King David would be the one after God's own heart. He is the best king that they've had. And King David would fight, and he would gain the most amount of territory, taking up this huge area here that they would have, and they would continue to lose and regain it depending on the king, whether they were good and wanted to serve God, or if they were evil and wanted to serve the pagan gods that were surrounding them at the time. As we go through there, eventually we get to Daniel. Daniel would be living in a category or living in an era where they would be taken over by King Nebuchadnezzar. He would translate his dreams and show a statue, and that statue would be prophecy to showing which kingdoms would be taking over in succession with one another, leading to what we believe is the present day of clay and iron at the feet. And as we have these exchanges of power, the time that we are now is now the Roman rule, where they have taken over pretty much everything as far as the known world is concerned. And Christ would be alive at this time, giving us another prophecy, this one being in Matthew, and that'll be chapter 24, verse 2. I had a good conversation earlier today with Brother Ule. Obviously, we'll help you out with that, but the sounds of pages turning was a sound that he described as a beautiful sound, to be able to have a physical Bible with you. Because in the future, there's even the possibility that, if we're just trying to keep all our documents digitally on our phones, that, with a flip of someone's switch, that we might not have access to those things anymore. To have a physical Bible is not just a beautiful thing, but it's a practical thing to pass down to your children and to have in your families, and just something that you can keep with you, that you can keep safe also. So So just keeping that in mind, because sometimes I get, my brain says like, oh, but it's the practical thing. I can just keep it in my pocket. Sometimes we have to avoid the thing that is practical and do the thing that is right. And having the physical word with us is something that we shouldn't pass up on. In Matthew, and that's chapter 24, chapter 24, verse 2, we have Christ, and he states another prophecy. The disciples come up to him and they say, Lord, take a look at the temple. It looks beautiful. It's such a great structure. And then he answers to them, but he answered and said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say to you, there shall not be one left here, one stone upon another, that shall not be thrown down. In 70 AD, we would have the destruction of the temple. We would have the slaughtering of the Israelites. They would even betray one another in that time, and they would be scattered amongst the lands. And for the temple itself, it was lined with gold. And during the fires, all that gold would melt into the cracks, onto the rocks. And the people that would go to the temple afterwards would see the value in that, and they would scratch and claw and dig and break every single stone that was there to collect all the valuable gold that came from that temple. And so it was totally destroyed all the way down to its foundation, just like Christ had said, from the surrounding people trying to extract the gold from it. We would have that, and about 2,000 plus years from that point, the Israelites would not have a place to call home. They wouldn't have a temple to go back to, which they still don't now. And in that time, there would be exchanges of power for the area that was promised to the Israelites. That holy land of milk and honey that they saw is now occupied by, was occupied by the Turks and by the Arabs. But as this time would go by, we would see another prophecy, that being in Ezekiel, and that'll be chapter 36, verses 1 through 7. So a little hefty there, but we have this prophecy, and this prophecy is going to be showing us what happens to the land when it doesn't belong, when it's not in possession of the people that it belongs to. We have to remember that when we were looking at Genesis, God gave Abraham the promise that this is your land. This is supposed to go to your descendants. This is the land that will be blessed as long as you are there. And in Ezekiel, it says this, Son of Man. And just a side note too, whenever we see Son of Man, usually we are referring to Christ, or at least a foreshadowing, or we can kind of hyperlink things from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And so it's kind of cool that in saying the Son of Man, prophesy to the mountains of Israel and say, mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. The enemies said to you, ah. So like in victory, they shout out to like the sky and said, the ancient heights have become our possessions. Therefore, prophesy and say, this is the sovereign Lord says, because they ravage and crush you from every side, so that you become the possession of the rest of the nations, and the object of the people's malice, talk, and slander. Therefore, mountains of Israel, hear the word of the sovereign Lord. That is, the sovereign Lord says, the mountains and the hills, the ravines and the valleys, to the desolate ruins and the desert towns that have been plundered and ridiculed by the rest of the nations around you. This is what the sovereign Lord says, in my burning zeal. So I don't know if there's a more appropriate way of saying burning zeal than to say that burning passion, or with rage, or with wrath. It says, I have spoken against the rest of the nations and against all of Edom, for the glee and with the malice in their hearts. They have made my land their own possession, so that they might plunder and plunder its pasture land, Therefore, prophesy concerning this land of Israel, and say to the mountains and the hills and the ravines and the valleys, this is the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord has said. I speak in my jealousy, and because you have suffered the scorn of the nations. Therefore, this is the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I swear with the uplift hand that the nations around you will also suffer scorn. That land, when it's not in the possession of the Israelites, is worthless. Absolutely worthless. We have Mark Twain was the author for Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, so a very famous author or writer. And when he had the opportunity, he decided that I'm going to travel around the world and I want to see these great places. And one of the places that he went to Jerusalem, and he went to Israel. And the reason why he went there was because on Sunday mornings, people would preach and say, this is the great land, this is the land of milk and honey, this is where the blessings come from. But when he got there, he makes an account very different than what he thought it was supposed to be. And he writes here in his well-documented journeys is that when crossing the land, he had this to say: "We traverse some miles to the desolate country, whose soil is rich enough, but is given to whole to weeds. The silent, mournful expanse. A degree of desolation is here that not even the imagination can grace with pomp of life and action. We reached the Taver safely. We never saw a human being on the entire route. We passed towards the goal of our crusade, renowned Jerusalem. The further we went, the hotter the sun got, and the more rocky and bare the landscape became. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, whose fast friends with the worthless soil, had almost deserted the entire country. Palestine sits on sackcloth and ashes, over the brood of the spell of a curse that has withered its fields." And so what he states here is he thought, I'm going to go to this place, it's going to be great. It's the milk and honey I've been reading about since I was a kid. And as he enters into that land, he sees that not only is the land so worthless, but it's so dead that cactus and olive trees, which usually thrive in those environments, don't want to be there either. Forget this place. And so he writes this, and Palestine is the ones who have conquered it at the time. And if we go forward a little bit of time, we get to the First World War. And in this battle, the Turkish Empire, who was in charge of this area, were allies with the Germans. And after that battle, and they inevitably lost, Britain had taken control of this area and had made a treaty stating that we have this Jewish people and we want to give them a nation again. And they would give them this huge area that would go into what we know is the Jordan now. And later, after World War II, and we had the UN, it would be redelegated because the Hassan family would come up to Churchill and sort of harass or take his ear and say, hey, that's our land. You need to give that land back to us. That doesn't belong to you. That doesn't belong to the Jewish people. And so it would be this huge expanse of land. And they said that he got a crayon, like a Crayola crayon on a map, and he just drew down the Jordan River and said, yeah, they can have that. And then he would give them this little sliver as opposed to the land that was promised to them. And that was even smaller than the land that God has already given to them anyways. And in that, the UN would divide Jerusalem into two states, and then, Israel, he would divide into two states between Palestine and Israel, and then Jerusalem itself was supposed to be under the control of the UN, and that's what they were supposed to, how to keep peace amongst the people there. But on May 14th, 1948, the Israel people would declare their independence. And on that day, as soon as they declared independence, every surrounding country from the Jordan, Syria, Egypt, I think like 7 altogether that border Israel, immediately went into an attack, took their tanks, their air forces, guns, militia, and they would go in and they invaded from every area at the same time. And with their back, they had no place to go. Originally, they only had about 19,000 fighters versus these 7 countries that were surrounding them at the time. And they would fight and get this little moment of breathing room where the UN tried to get a peace treaty going. But in that time, they would have the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, there we go, would smuggle weapons to them. And in that time of peace, they would bring their numbers up from 19,000 to 100,000 to fight off the Arabs that went into this. If you look back, it's called the First Arab-Israeli War. And in that, when they originally went over there, one of the Arab generals said this in quotations, that this was to be an extermination and a massacre, like a monumentous massacre upon Israel, to destroy them, to wipe them off the face of the earth for the rest of time. But in that, God still blessed them. In that, just like Joshua and Caleb would look over and see the giants and say, we can take those guys on. You would have small little Israel surrounded by all their enemies, and God would still bless them and still not just fend off the other countries, but absolutely whip them and become their individual sovereign nation that we know today. And so this fighting that we see, this hostility between nations is something that has been happening since the very beginning. The Israelites have always been on the brink of extinction since the very beginning. They're always being slaughtered, massacred, enslaved, dispersed, and just shattered about across the entire world. And even now, sometimes you'll run into a commercial, or if you're on the radio station, you'll hear the guy say like, hey, if you have Jewish heritage, we'll pay for your trip to go back to Israel so you can see the land that you come from. And that land now, this little section here, that's occupied by the Israelites now, or by Israel, is a green place. I remember one of my coworkers at Benpac, he got to go to Israel to fix one of their machines that we had sold over there. And when he came back with pictures, we took a look at those pictures, like, hey, I think these pictures are of Santa Paula. Like, no, that's what Israel looks like. And it was just filled with orange trees all over the place. Like, even the dirt looks like our dirt. It was really amazing to look at it. And so now Israel, they have a huge citrus economy along with other fruits and vegetables, and they're the number 1 exporter in Europe of produce. And this little area that's right here, it fits inside Orange County. It's no bigger than New Jersey. It is a small little place, and they produce enough food to be the number 1 exporter into Europe. And it's boggling, but even now we still have more prophecy for that. So now that this little section of land belongs to the people that God ordained it for, if you'll turn with me to Ezekiel, and that'll be chapter 36, and that'll be verses 34 to 36. We'll have another prophecy, and this one, I think, lines up so perfectly with what we see today for Israel. It says the following: the desolate land will be cultivated instead of lying desolate in the sight of all those who pass through it. So if we're thinking about Mark Twain again, who looked through it and just scoffed and said, this land is worthless. Cactus and olive trees don't want to grow here. It'll be tilled, and then people who walk through it, they will say, this land that was a waste has become like the Garden of Eden. The city that were lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited. Then the nations around you that remain will know that the Lord had rebuilt and what was destroyed and has replaced what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do. So he has this promise, and that promise is that these people who belong here, I will bless that land, and when they take it. And even now, if you look at YouTube videos or like see what's going on, not only are they like this green state, but they have this thing called the dome. Like, it is the coolest thing to look at. I mean, everyone's yelling and screaming, unfortunately, like in those videos, but like you'll see, they'll be sending rocket after rocket after rocket, and mid-sky, that rocket will get sniped out of the sky and prevent them from attacking the people inside of Israel. And so I can't even think of a cooler fortification than that. Like, that makes me think of like very sci-fi movie, it's strange that sometimes like contraption will come along where you think to yourself like, oh, that's a real thing? That's crazy. But you have here where God like shows off like how it's like fortified itself, and to give you even more, how much more clear it is how blessed they are because God is the one who blesses them. Did you know that there's only 2 borders in the world that you can see from outer space? It's kind of cool. So at night, North Korea turns off all of its lights, has no lights. So you can see the surrounding countries, how they light up, and all the like people are still, moving, and like, they light their, roads, and it makes it safe to travel and stuff. But in North Korea, they turn off every single light. So it's just a giant patch of darkness from the view of space. And it's evident to know that for the place that lacks God, in the dark, they also lack light. And then the other place that you can also see very clear border of is Israel. Because when you look down from space at Israel, Israel is green, and everything around it is dead. There's nothing around there. It's totally barren, it's brown, nothing grows there. And that's because God has blessed that place. And so much so that when you go into the when you go up into like the upper atmosphere of like Earth, you can look down, you can very clearly see and define where the blessing is and where it's not. With those, when we look at prophecies, we also have to know that if you had a checklist and you were checking off what prophecies has happened, eventually you have to know that you're going to get to the end of that checklist. And that's the time clock that we're talking about, where most of the prophecies are always almost centered on Israel and the Israelites, or the people of God. And as we look to them, we know that they're the counter to a clock that we don't understand the numbers for. They're the ones who show us when the end will eventually come. I don't know, I hope it relates to a lot of you, but when you're younger and you see the street lights come on, that means it's time to go home, right? And right now what's happening is we're looking over there, and we don't know how much time we have left, but the sky is orange now. Like, the time is getting there. We're awaiting those street lights. We're awaiting the time where it's time to come home. And to go back to the very beginning, sometimes it's hard, but we have to recognize that it's our responsibility for the ones who love Christ and who are loved by Christ, that we need to let other people know that they are loved by Christ, and God is desperately telling them, hey, the lights are going to come on soon, and I want you to come home. And it's our responsibility to speak to them. It's our responsibility to show them love. And those times where you're stuck in a vehicle with another guy, for 6 hours, you need to take those opportunities, and you don't have to harass people. Last week, Martine was talking about his uncle Larry, right? And he was talking about how he had these little tracts, and without fail, he would give people these little tracts. And what they do with them, would they rip them up, throw them away? Maybe they just keep it in their pocket. He was out there and he was trying to give seed. He was trying to pass people as much as they could. And what we have to realize, when the sun goes down, you can't you can't harvest anymore. When the sun is down, you can't sow seed. It's the end of the day. And just to give you like some examples here, not all of us will have the same dynamic entry into the gospel as the other person. I know it sounds very strange, but we talk about it on Wednesday night where, I'm thankful for the cancer that God gave me and would heal me from. Because when people come up to me, they'll hear that rumor like, hey, did you hear about what happened to Pat? Like, oh, that's so crazy. I'm going to go talk to him. And when I do get to talk to them, I let them know like, hey, this thing happened to me. And I had already predetermined in my heart that even if God didn't heal me from that, I was still going to love God. He's still my number one. And when I get to talk to people about that, some of them would be, like staring at the floor like they just had PTSD, where they're even thinking back to themselves like, here are some horrible things that happened to me and I lost my faith, but here you almost died, but you want to keep it. And so I'm so thankful for that testimony that I have. And for you out there who gets to talk to people, especially ones that you love, hey, if you want to just like give them that little track, or even if it's, even if you had a bad day, let's say in just an awful week, you can still be honest with that person and say like, hey, you know what, when they ask you how is your day, you can tell them like, hey, you know what, this week has been really rough, but I know God is on my side. I know that just like Mickey was for Rocky, he's in my corner, and he's like, he's on my shoulders telling me I can do this. And so it just, even just little things like that to let people know that God is with me, God loves me, and God is in my corner. You can present the gospel with your own testimonies of even just a day-to-day, I had a hard day, and I thank God that he was with me through. So today, if you're in a position where you don't know where you stand with God, make today the day that you decide that I want to make things right. Because we see the sky is orange, the day is about to be over, and eventually that light is going to come on. Those street lights are going to call us home, and then there won't be any time after that. So if that's where you are today, don't skip out. When we play this music, please come up here to this altar, dedicate your life to God. Let him know that, Lord, I love you, and I love what you did for me, and I thank you that you love me too. And for the rest of you where God is already in your heart, let today be the day where you realize that I need to talk to the people around me, the people that I love, and that I see that the time is running out. I see that as we look into Israel, that the prophecies are being checked off, and it's time to go home soon. So please everyone stand. And as I pray, if we can have our worship team come up.